Redditors. What's the most heartbreaking thing you've overheard someone say about you? In college, I was doing homework in my room, which was just off of the living room. And some other people I considered close friends were in the living room talking about how I didn't have a personality, and that our guy friends only tolerated me because they were trying to fuck me. They hadn't realized I was home and were quite surprised when I walked out of my room. None ever apologize. Interestingly though, it's been 12 years. I'm still good friends with all of those guys, and I never fucked any of them. Quite the long con if they're keeping me around just for that. Worst failure because of how disappointing and awful I turned out, my mother for raising me to be such a horrible person, or my grandmother for raising my mum who would raise a daughter like that. Almost verbatim, I was about 10. I think I lied about homework. I was locked in my room and heard them at my door. Another was when I heard my mum tell her friend she thought I was lying about my father molesting me. That one made me think no one would ever believe me about anything. I don't know if this counts, but I heard the story from my younger brother. I've been away from home for 10 years, and I didn't see most of my family much anymore going abroad. Expectedly, I missed my grandma's final hours. She and I were never really close, as I don't agree with the way she treated my mother, her daughter-in-law. But at her deathbed, in those final moments, as her consciousness started faded away, she looked at my younger brother and said to me, "Is that you? I'm glad you've made it back." Till this day I still don't know what to make of it. I grew up with told another friend that people that looked like me didn't belong in high-class mall we were going to go to, and he was embarrassed to be seen with someone who dressed the way I did, which, admittedly, wasn't cool for the year 2000. All black, trench coat, band shirts, long hair, that kind of thing. He was preppy as they come. I stopped being his friend when I heard, and I still won't be his friend 20 years later. I even tried to forgive him and add him on Facebook, but he ran his mouth again, and that was that. Doing an internship at the place I'm currently working at, I overheard the boss telling a coworker he was thinking about hiring me, and that coworker said that in her opinion, I wasn't fit for the job. However, when asked to explain why, she didn't provide a reasonable answer. We had a good time working together. I had a disagreement a few days earlier, but that was enough for recommending the boss not to hire me. When I was hired, she came to me and told me she was the one who convinced the boss to hire me. "We'll get ice cream later if you just play with her for a little while. She's like that because her mom just died. You won't have to deal with her forever." I appreciated up until that point because she was the only one who I thought wanted to play with me after my mum died, even though I would sometimes start crying out of nowhere and had severe anxiety. I was 9 and didn't play with anyone for over a year after this because I assumed I was making people deal with me by being around. Man, reading these makes me feel like shit. In high school, a new kid joined our class who was homeschooled. He was a little weird but meant well and was friendly. One time he came up in conversation, and I said, "Yeah, you can tell he was homeschooled," in a mean tone. He was standing right behind me, and I looked him right in the eyes awkwardly. I could tell it hurt his feelings pretty bad, and he just ended up walking away. He committed suicide the next school year, 2014. If I could go back and change one thing in my life, that would be it. I overheard my cousin, who I loved more than anyone else in my family, who I thought loved me too, say, "No one cares about her." He was speaking inclusive of himself as well. That moment broke something in me. It was something I had always felt, but it took hearing it in such a cruel, cold way by someone I thought was my ally for me to finally accept, other than my spouse, and eventually my kids. I've never let anyone else in. I also never spoke to my cousin again and went very low contact with the rest of my family tree. My narcissistic dad telling my ex-husband, his parents, that my mom and I are neglectful, dim people, and that we lack capacity to take care of my daughters. This has obviously scared my ex and his parents at some point, but luckily my ex is aware of how terrible my dad is. My mum is the sweetest lady I've ever known, and everyone else thinks so too, and I look up to her always. We nurture the girls and work as a team. So it's unfortunate how much we've gotten bullied in the last few decades. Luckily my mum is in the process of divorce. Had my mum making fun of me with my grandma. I had gained weight in college, and then just saying that, while it might have stung, wouldn't have been a big deal. They were laughing about how big my butt was and how I looked terrible and how I probably thought I looked good. So I confronted them, and they laughed at me more to my face because they didn't care at all that I knew they were saying that. They told me to be quiet, that I was only upset because they knew I was right. I hear those words in my head a lot years later. My granny had dementia. One evening she saw the trailer for the movie Armageddon on TV and thought it was the news. She was in her bed crying while my parents were trying to comfort her, and I overheard her say to my parents, "You need to protect her, me. Go hide and take care of her. She is such a nice little girl. Leave me behind. I'll slow you down. Please take her to safety and tell her I love her." I was really moved by that. She was ready to sacrifice herself and face the end of the world alone to keep me safe. I used a friend to replace my dead sister. I once said I like thrifting and hanging out cause it's distracted me sometimes from being sad about it. Working when we literally spent every day together, I really got attached. I loved everything about him. He let me do stuff for him, and he entertained me with his stories, and he shared his music with me. Makes me sad to think he really never liked me as a real friend and thought I was just using him. That I wasn't really family because I was a stepkid. My father confessed this had been said by someone in my stepmother's family after I asked why said person was not at my high school graduation. It has since been explained that this is not exactly what was said, and that this was only how my dad took it at the time, and that he was still mad when he explained it to me. But still, at 17, when I was already struggling to figure out who I was, that hurt. And it did a lot of damage between me and my stepmom's family. About me and my best friend at the time, I don't think there is a strong friendship around us, except between Sadrella and X. I call BS. They are not friends. It's just Sadrella following X around like a puppy. This was one night at summer camp. We were 6 girls, sharing a room. I pretended to be asleep, my best friend sleeping and the other for gossiping around. I already struggled with my self-esteem, so hearing my best friend may not really like me, but just tolerate me, was gut-wrenching. My mum told my dad it's good she can never have children, having her ruin my life. We would have been a lot happier without her. My dad didn't agree, and they argued about it. This was hours after I found out I wasn't able to have them. A month or so later, I was crying to my dad about it, and she walked in the room and told me it would be okay since they won't get in the way of me being happy. She said that one to my face. I don't talk to them anymore, my dad, for other reasons. Accidentally saw my dad joking about me and slamming me to his and my boss on email on the family PC. We worked at the same company for a time. I won't pretend I was an angel, but that hurt a bit. A girl I liked in school in the 90s, but hadn't actually met after seeing my pic, said to my friend, "I wish he looked how he sounded on the phone. He sounded so much better looking on the phone." We'd been chatting for a while. She didn't know I could hear her. I died a little that day too. My 2 best friends started not hanging out with me in high school randomly. I finally confronted one of them why they were ignoring me, and she said, "Well, we thought you were going crazy." I said, "Even if I was going crazy, wouldn't you want to help me?" And my friendship with them fizzled out after that. It was really heartbreaking cause those two were my world in terms of friendships from when I was little to high school. I often think of that interaction and how it hurt. That I was broken. I had just had my 6th miscarriage. My Phil said it to my stepmom, not realizing I was standing behind them. Stepmom made a quip that even the 2 kids DH, and I do have on okay, our son has an autoimmune disease. and that she wasn't surprised because I'm such terrible breeding stock. Nothing was more fun than my husband yelling at them and explaining to them that he is the carrier for this disease, and it comes from his dad. Overheard my best friend and his wife talking, and while I forget the exact words, I was essentially, "You don't want to be a loser. I mean, look at me." It hurt, but he was right. Out of school making shit money at a terrible job, not pursuing anything worthwhile. Single. Awkward. Smoking weed all the time. Out of shape. Lazy, undisciplined. That was like 13 years ago, and my life isn't like that anymore. It was hard to hear, but also necessary. Overheard my best friend and his wife talking, and while I forget the exact words, I was essentially, "You don't want to be a loser. I mean, look at me." It hurt, but he was right. Out of school making shit money at a terrible job, not pursuing anything worthwhile. Single. Awkward. Smoking weed all the time. Out of shape. Lazy, undisciplined. That was like 13 years ago, and my life isn't like that anymore. It was hard to hear, but also necessary. I was super depressed and struggling with suicide in high school. Finally decided to try and open up to my best friend about it. Started with mentioning I was tempted with cutting, and then the next day admitted to it. Her response: "I don't care. You already told me about it yesterday." And then went on to talk about herself. Never talked to anyone else about it till years later. And I had already clawed my way out of the depression myself.